Hi everyone, welcome to our class. Each module and for each chapter that we cover in the book, you will have a set of PowerPoint slides with audio. So in these presentations I'm going to assume that you have read the chapters, so I won't be covering each chapter in minute detail. But what I will do is pull out the information that needs more explanation and the concepts for the exams. So let's start with the question of, what is organizational communication? Well, it's a subdiscipline of the main field of communication. And as a discipline, it's about 60 years old. So think about the other communication courses that you've taken if you're a comm major. So small group, interpersonal, gender communication. Those are all subdisciplines of the larger field of communication, just like organizational communication is. So let's look at a definition of organizational communication. You can see here on the screen the study of organizational practices that are accomplished through communication. Or, as Koshman, a professor of communication, states, organizations are the result of the communication of those individuals within them. So he is saying that organizations happen first because of communication. So we have a couple of ways to look at ORCOM. It is the study of organizational practices that are accomplished through communication, and that includes everything. We could not organize without human communication. So organizational communication includes the following: the sending and receiving of messages among interconnected individuals within a particular environment that are working toward the same goal. So let's break that down just a minute. So we have the sending and receiving of messages, and as we dig deeper into the book, we'll look at the networks in which messages are sent and received. Then we have interconnected individuals. So that means people who are working in the same organization. They are connected through the organization that they work for, which is a particular environment. And they are working toward organizational goals as a common goal. They may have departmental goals, but they also have the common goal that the organization has. Organizational communication is highly contextual and culturally dependent. So, by saying that it is highly contextual, communication depends on the setting or the context in which it occurs. It is culturally independent in that the organization you work for has different values, attitudes, and beliefs that are pushed forward by those in charge. We'll talk more about culture in organizations as we move through the book too. So think about the different organizations that you've worked for or that you belong to. So was communication among employees or members of the organization exactly the same at those places? Probably not, because communication is dependent on being culturally dependent, and it's also contextual. So what does organizational communication help us do? Well, if you have a job, you know that you have to talk to your coworkers to accomplish your tasks that are related to your roles and responsibilities. Organizational communication helps us adapt to changes in an organization. So we get the messages from our supervisors and from the people above the supervisors, and then those are formal networks. We also get information through the grapevine. That's the informal communication, the information that's passed from employee to employee, which may or may not be true, but it's a grapevine. That's what happens in the absence of communication. Organizational communication also helps us develop relationships with others in the organization, and it helps us coordinate, plan, and control organizational goals. So, communication with an organization largely focuses on building relationships and interacting with internal organizational members and interested external publics. So think about who would make up the external public or stakeholders of Google. Well, the employees, leaders, and anyone within the organization are obviously the internal organizational members. But anyone who uses Google products, probably like you, and I know I do, are the external public or stockholders in Google. So for organizations to be effective, they have to have competent communicators. It shows organizational communication studies show us that organizations rely on effective communication and efficient communication skills from their members. You've probably heard before that successful employees need to be skilled in public presentation, listening, and interpersonal communication to flourish within an organization. Organizations seek people who can follow and give directions, provide useful feedback, get along with others and vendors, and creatively and critically solve problems. So it's very complex, the study of organizational communication, and I hope as we move along you will find lots of parallels from the text to draw from in your own experience. So let's move on to Chapter 2. If you have any questions about these videos, these presentations, post them in the frequently asked FAQ discussion board, and I will look at the discussion board, but you are also welcome to answer other students' questions as well. So let's move on to Chapter 2. These are the classical approaches to organizing. So in this chapter we're reading about the foundational theories that underlie the study of organizational communication. And these theories gained prominence mostly during the Industrial Revolution or a little bit thereafter. We're going to look at Fayol's theory of classical management, Weber's theory of bureaucracy, and yes, it's Weber, he's German. He was German, and Taylor's theory of scientific management. But before we start digging into the theories, let's look at the present and let's look at the impact of these classical approaches on our organizations now. So if you look at table 2.1 in your book, let's see if I can find the page number for you. You'll see this communication in classical organizations. Let's see, what page is it on? Okay, I'm not seeing the page number right off, but it's in Chapter 2. Alright, so you see communication flow in classical organizations. The direction of the communication flow is vertical or downward. The mode or the channel of communication was usually written, and the style of communication is formal. So think about an organization you work for. Does communication work that way in your organization? Chances are that it might, because these models of classical theories are still very much in use. So other leftover attributes from your classical theories that we see in today's organizations are division of labor. Everyone, especially in bureaucratic organizations, there's a strict division of labor about what you do and what you process and how that connects to someone else. There's a strict hierarchy, meaning that there's a flow of people in charge. And why I didn't write down these page numbers, I don't know, but there's a chart in Chapter 2 on page 21, and it shows a hierarchy. It's figure 2.1, organizational chart for a classical organization. So some of the organizations that still follow the strict hierarchy, of course, are military organizations, manufacturing and service organizations, So when you think about manufacturing, maybe think about the Amazon factory or any kind of warehouse where each person has a very specific job and how they perform it. And then nonprofit organizations also follow a strict hierarchy and division of labor. Underlying the three theories that we're looking at in this chapter is the machine metaphor. So this starts on page 18 and 19. And the machine metaphor looks at, there are a few aspects to it. So it's important, the specialization is important, standardization is important, replaceability and predictability. And I believe your book uses the metaphor of a car. So you think about how a car has specific parts and you can drive it. There is some standardization as each car has a dashboard and a steering wheel, and there's a way to turn it on, whether it's a push button or a key, and the parts are replaceable, and there is a predictability in driving a car. So thinking about this machine metaphor, these classical theorists looked at work this way. Man is a machine, doing the work of the organization. There was a division of labor. There was a standardization in jobs. People and parts could be easily replaced, and there was predictability in the workflow. If you have a minute, click on the link down there for the Charlie Chaplin video, Charlie Chaplin in Modern Times. You may have seen this before, but I always think it's worth watching again. So let's start with Fayol's elements of management. So you can see the five different types, or the five different aspects in this theory. These are listed on pages 19 and 20. So two influential aspects of Fayol's theories are elements of management and principles of management. Element looks at what managers should do, and principles look at how managers should do this. So, with planning, you've got determining the best way to attain goals. Organizing, that means the arranging of your human resources, the people you have working for you. Command, managers set tasks and organizational goals. Coordination, activities within the organization are harmonized into a single whole that meets organizational goals. And control, comparison between goals and activities. Are the activities achieving the goals of the organization? So now we have principles of management. And you can see the 6 that are listed on the screen on the slide. You also have principles of organizational power, reward, and attitude intertwined within the principles of management. Note that this is Fayol's idea of how an organization should run. It is a prescriptive theory in that it describes and explains. So it's like a blueprint for an organization. Remember, as we look at theories, that there are strengths and weaknesses in every theory. And some organizational communication researchers think that Fayol's theory doesn't adequately describe or explain the ways in which organizations function. However, Fayol's theory of classical management has had a big impact on organizations and continues to be used today. So there must be something that appeals to people in this theory. All right, let's look at Weber's theory of bureaucracy. Many of us are familiar with bureaucracy. So we have 6 aspects or facets of bureaucracy on these next 2 slides. So Weber lived at the same time as Fayol, and he was a German sociologist. His theory of organizing is considered an ideal type theory because it lays out an ideal organization without advocating one best way. So I'm sure that many of you work in or have had experience with bureaucratic organizations. We're all part of one in higher education, so we all belong to a bureaucracy. Think about the way that the university functions as we look at some of the aspects of Weber's theory. So you've got a clearly defined hierarchy as in Fayol's theory. So look at table 2.1 in your book again for an example of a hierarchy. Your division of labor, everyone has a defined job and an immediate supervisor to report to. Centralization of decision-making and power. Decisions are made by employees at the top of the hierarchy, and then those decisions are funneled down through the organization. So there's very much a downward flow. Authority is dominant and is based on 3 grounds. Traditional or legitimate power. So who is in charge? Who is legitimately in charge? The CEO, the boss, the person with the title. Charismatic power, that means that person who has very much of an interpersonal appeal that people want to follow and want to be like. And then rational legal authority. Power rests in the rules that are established through rationality. They're established through norms in the organization and employee expertise. The result is a very impersonal organization. So if you've ever encountered a problem with a bureaucratic organization, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And me, I've experienced many issues with bureaucratic organizations. You feel like there are no exceptions to the rules because procedures overrule any human circumstance. All right, and last, let's look at Taylor's theory of scientific management. So, Taylor was a U.S. businessman who lived in the early part of the 20th century. His focus in this theory is about the relationship between the manager and the employee and how the employee is controlled at work. Taylor was not as much concerned with organizational structure as he was about relationship. So he concentrated on the micro level of organizational functioning. And so if you've ever had what we call a micromanager, you can probably relate to this theory. Watch this 5-minute video about Taylorism on ABC World News. I think it's really interesting and it gives you a few more details than the book. It summarizes it really well. So I'm going to leave you with some questions to think about in regards to these classical theories. 1. Are the ideas of Fayol, Weber, and Taylor still relevant for organizations today? And 2, what are your major critiques or issues with these theories? All right, so that wraps up the intro to the course or to the text and chapter 2. I will see you for chapter 3.